first episode. Pete, a bank teller, walks to work along pavement. There's a man at the very edge of the riverbank. Pete. Psst. Psst. I said, psst. Man turns head. Pete, sorry to break your thought. Do you have a smoke? So the next thing you see two men at the bank of the river having a smoke. It's dark, it's just a silhouette. And then Pete walks to work along the pavement and he enters the conference room. The bank conference room. Meeting. Mark, the product specialist. We've gone through the roof with this one. Albert, the bank manager. He's a bit elderly. The sales certainly look successful. Amanda, the salesperson, crossing her legs in the direction of the manager. Exactly what would you consider successful? Or exactly what do you consider success? Pete, the bank teller. Hold on. Bringing in the desperate man who was blindfolded and sitting him down. Mark looks at his watch. The phone rings. Mark leaves the conference room. So, Mark's mother, so, how did it go? Mark, Mr. Albert did use the word success. I knew it, Marky. I told you so. Mark, that you did, Mother. That you did. Mrs. Momby, I have the painter here, so I won't be able to gab. Can you bring home some of those lovely Turkish towels? Mark, I'll see what I can do, Mother. Mother scouring the kitchen sink, Mrs. Momby. Mother, the painters to Mrs. Momby in her house, painting. Painter on his back, painting the ceiling mural. Mrs. Momby, the groundbreaking is next Friday, and we haven't broken ground on a pint of paint at the bank. Mother scouring the kitchen sink. A bit more vim, the two painters finishing her sentence. And a bit more vigor. Mark in the executive showers and dining, looking at the Turkish towels. Mother smiling. And you'll be done long. You'd be long done by now, referring to the painters. Albert to Mark in the atrium. Albert, what is your opinion looking at the unpainted walls? Mark, the color match. The color matches superbly. There's a brown breaking reception. Mrs. Momby to bank manager. How refreshing to see it all in its original condition. Albert, do you think so? I suppose you're right. The bank manager cuts the red ribbon. Amanda in marketing. Now I know we usually turn the lights out after we've finished our champagne, but I can't wait another second. Then the camera rolls, the commercial for the bank, the new commercial for the bank. Two gnomes appear after the bank closes, checking everything is perfect for the morning. And it always is. The commercial, Echo known. What you don't know, we do. And the lights go back on in the bank. Albert, the manager, is in a twister with Amanda. I thought about Albert getting up with the help of his secretary. Well, actually, he might be getting up with the help of Amanda. Albert, we were just discussing a trip to the Canadian Virgin Islands. Pete, bank teller. So are you going or not? Cynthia, another bank teller. Never knew there was a Canadian Virgin Island. Pete answers, it's being discussed. Mrs. Mommy, well, if something develops, I'll be up for it. I need a change of scenery. Pete slips his arm around Mrs. Momby's waist. Pete to Mrs. Momby, do you know what that means? Mrs. Momby smiles at him, looks around, takes her bag, then smacks him on the head, whispering to Pete all the meanwhile, Mrs. Momby, meet me outside in 10 minutes. Mrs. Momby waiting outside the bank. A handsome scout offers to walk her across the street. Mrs. Momby, thank you. She walks across the street with him. Other side of the street, a race car pulls up. The man in the race car says, do you need a ride home, dear? Mother gets into the sports car and waves goodbye. Mrs. Momby mouths to Pete as she's going by in the sports car, eat your heart out. At home, Mrs. Momby and Mark. Mrs. Momby. They might be sitting there on the sofa after dinner. Mrs. Momby. It wouldn't have worked out, you know, between Pete and I. Mark. Worked? You managed to scare the daylights out of him. Mrs. Momby smile. Mrs. Momby. Did I now? Leaves the room. Mrs. Momby leaves the room with a copy of Victoria's Secret. Then I have correction. It wouldn't have worked with Pete, I guess Mrs. Momby says. A few weeks later.